Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm product manager at Identity, and I'm going to talk about why, compared to the technology we need to do DevOps, the people are a lot harder. And I always like to start talking about these human problems by talking about what DevOps means to me. So when I started my career, I was a release manager at a large retail organisation, and as a release manager, it was literally my job to be the bridge between development and operations. And what that meant was I had to make sure that the software that we were building was fit to go into production, and that the process by which we got that software into production was sound. That was pretty hard. It was hard for a number of reasons. Firstly, we were deploying quarterly, so we were only deploying once every 3 months. So when we deployed change, we deployed an awful lot of change all at once. And we didn't do it in a massively automated way either. So as you can imagine, things went wrong. So in the weeks that led up to one of our big bang quarterly releases, there would be last minute bugs, there'd be environmental differences, there'd be change requests from the business trying to get just one last little feature that's really important into the release. And of course, when we went live, after the 24-hour overnight deployment, things went wrong. Things didn't go as expected, things didn't go to plan. We broke stuff. And then we would spend the next couple of weeks locked in a war room trying to bring back stability to our production system. We'd have to pull in people from all over the organisation to help us fix the problem. And of course that had a knock-on impact onto the next release. So we were always running to keep up, and we had increasing pressure from above to build more, to deploy more, and to be better at this. It wasn't uncommon for our meetings to sort of descend into full-blown arguments at that time. It wasn't uncommon for us to start work at 7 a.m. and be ordering pizza at 7 in the evening. We had go-no-go meetings to decide whether or not we were going to ship into production, but we also had them as to whether we were going to order dinner for everyone who was still in the office late at night. I went into technology, and so many of us do, because it's fun and exciting, but this was killing us. So in 2011, I read continuous delivery, and I started to get involved in the DevOps community. And for me, it was the answer to a lot of my problems. It wasn't the answer to the problem you expect, though. I wasn't asking, how do we ship more faster? I was asking the question, how do I do this without killing my team in the process? And that's what DevOps means to me. It's a way of delivering more software to a higher quality faster, but it's a way of working that makes the environment so much healthier for the people in it. So to talk about the sort of history of DevOps, in 2010, in Mountain View, John Willis and Damon Edwards, two of the very initial voices in DevOps, came up with the acronym CAMS to describe DevOps. And that meant culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. And it was later that year that Jez Humble added the L, and it became CALMS for lean. And you'll notice something about CALMS. There's a bit of people stuff in there. We're talking about culture and we're talking about sharing. Quite often those two elements get forgotten. More recently, Jennifer Davis and Catherine Daniels have published Effective DevOps, where they propose the 4 pillars of effective DevOps are collaboration, affinity, tools, and scaling. And you see where I'm going. We've got some of that fluffy human stuff in here, but how often do we sit down with our team and talk about how we can build affinity with our business owners? How often we talk about how we can build affinity across technical practices within our organisation? We don't do that. We always think that this fluffy people stuff is someone else's problem. And the DevOps handbook, published last year by Jean Kim, Jess Humble, Patrick Dubois, John Willis, has this great statement in it, in a section called The Ethics of DevOps, which I was fascinated to read. DevOps astonishingly enables us to simultaneously improve organizational performance, achieve the goals of all the various technology roles, and improve the human condition. Or as I like to read it, DevOps astonishingly enables us to improve the human condition. And I think human condition is the right way to talk about it, because so often we talk about culture as this really intangible thing that we experience when we're at work. We either have the good culture or we don't. Containers will not fix your broken culture. The C in CALMS does not stand for containers. We need to remember that. But when we look at our culture and we think, oh hey, like, I've found the problem, people, we just need to fix our broken culture. When we look at our culture as though it's a thing that we experience and not a thing that we do, it actually takes us further away from the culture that we want. So let's look at what culture actually is to get a better understanding of how we influence it. Culture determines what is acceptable or unacceptable, important or unimportant, right or wrong, workable or unworkable. It encompasses all learned and shared, explicit or tacit assumptions, beliefs, knowledge, norms and values, as well as attitudes, behaviour, dress and language. That's a really long definition, but I like to pick up just a few elements of that. We're talking about beliefs, values and behaviours. These are really fundamental things that we hold as individuals. These are not things that we necessarily share with everybody in our organisation. And when we talk about beliefs, how many of us in our organisations have experienced these beliefs, whether it be through our organisational structures or management or whatever, or our processes? We believe things like this, even though we know they're counterproductive. We believe that developers don't care about production. Why wouldn't they care? We believe that ops don't care about shipping new features. We quite often believe that no one cares about security, even though if you ask someone, of course they do. These are beliefs that we hold about the teams that we are working with that can be really counterproductive to when we want to adopt a DevOps way of working. But of course, we're techies, we're engineers, we're technologists, and we approach these problems in the same way that we approach our software problems. You can't just reconfigure your culture overnight. You can't just flip the AV switch and say, hey, we've got a new culture tomorrow, and everybody comes into work and they all collaborate really effectively anymore. And it's because we're not like servers. We're human. We have 90 billion nerve cells in our brains. Each of them is linked by trillions of connections, hundreds of trillions of different pathways that our brain signals can travel through. And most of the processing that we do in our brains is completely subconscious. We don't even have control of most of that. So it's useful to talk about habits when we talk about DevOps, because so much of the habitual behaviour that is a barrier to adopting DevOps in your organisation is this subconscious behaviour. I like to think of culture as being the product of every single person in the organisation. If you think of it like that, if you think of every individual as a component, and if you think of habits as a little piece of automation within each of those components, then you can see that we've got a really big problem. We've got a lot of technical debt up in our heads that we need to refactor. And it's not as easy as just rewriting a piece of software. So to start with, let's get to know our brains a little bit. We've got three key areas to our brains. We've got the reptilian part of the brain, which is the oldest and the most automatic. We've then got the mammalian, emotional part of the brain, which takes care of our feelings. And we have the logical prefrontal cortex, which takes care of all of your conscious thinking. That's the very human part of the brain. So here's a problem that we understand really well. We've got some legacy code. We've got some legacy code, and it's lurking underneath abstraction layer. We don't even know this legacy code is buggy, but I can assure you it is. And the other thing about legacy code is it's really hard to reprogram. So it takes a lot more time and effort from every single one of us individually to bring these thoughts and behaviours into our conscious thinking mind and make a decision to do things differently than it is to act out of habit. And when we talk about trying to change as humans, it's interesting to put it into the context of the emotional cycle of change. Again, your surveyors won't go through an emotional cycle of change. We as humans are very different, and we need to treat change to our people differently. So to talk through the emotional cycle of change, we start off with a peak of uninformed optimism. This is where whatever change you're making feels like it's absolutely the best thing ever. You can't see any of the flaws in your perfect project plan, for example. You don't know what you don't know at this stage. But as you find out more, you start to slip down into informed pessimism. Things aren't quite as easy as you thought they were going to be. And that's when you can dip into the well of despair. The well of despair is what you get when you're confronted with so many challenges that they seem insurmountable. You don't think that actually this change you were going to try and make can actually stick at all, and you want to give up. But if you do push forward, you can start to climb up through some of those issues, break down those barriers, and then you get to the hopeful realism. And of course, finally, you get the rewarding completion when the change is all done. Has anybody experienced the well of despair at work? Yay, it's some hands. I mean, boo, no, I wish you hadn't. But I've definitely been there. And I look at this emotional cycle of change and I think, well, hold on, is this not like the emotional cycle of changes? Because I never really get to that rewarding completion. Once we've done with one transformation, we're starting the next. We might have done agile, BDD, we might be moving to the cloud or adopting containers. We're being asked to change constantly in so many different ways that we very rarely get to experience that high of rewarding completion. We're getting thrown straight back down into the well of despair because we're having to change so frequently. Thomas Friedman, in his book Thank You for Being Late, has this interesting graph that describes the feeling that I think many of us experience in the technology industry. The red line is the line of how fast technology is advancing, and it's exponential. Whereas our human adaptability is pretty finite, and we're not evolving at the same pace that technology is. We've got a bit of a gap, and it's uncomfortable. We're not feeling very comfortable. We feel like we're not doing enough. We feel like we need to do more to keep up. And Thomas Friedman proposes that to make that leap, we need to create environments in which we can learn faster and govern smarter, which to me sounds a little bit like DevOps. So when we talk about change, what we're really talking about is our adaptability. There's a lot of reasons why a big DevOps transformation will stall and fail, and it could be any one of numerous reasons. And these things are hard because what you're talking about is you're talking about changing people. You can change your tools and technology, but actually if you want to transform a culture, you're talking about changing people. So what I want to talk about now, and we could talk about a host of practices that you can do in the context of DevOps to get better at this, but two of the most human and two of the most impactful are blame and trust. So I'm going to talk about blame now. So blame is the responsibility for a fault or a wrong. Quite often, especially in large organisations, we seek to blame. We seek to find somebody who fucked up. Who is that person who dropped the ball? We were all working together so wonderfully until that one person got it wrong. And when we seek to blame individuals or teams in our organisation, actually we neglect the real cause of the problems. So, in Sidney Decker's book, A Field Guide to Human Error, he talks about how we need to change our perception of human error. The old view is that actually when you do root cause analysis and you find somebody who did something and that caused the problem, that was enough. Sidney Decker proposes that we go deeper. We look at the system in which that person was operating, and we look deeper than just the fact that they made this mistake. We look at why they made this mistake. We start with the belief that actually nobody fucks up on purpose, and I like to believe that as well. So human error is not the root cause of failure. We need to look deeper, and we need to look at our processes and our practices to find the real reasons. And when we do this, we can actually start viewing failure as an opportunity to learn. And learning is what we need to do faster in order to keep up with the acceleration of technology progress. And it's easy to see the link between blame and team psychological safety. Team psychological safety, in a study by Amy Evanson, has been linked to team learning behaviours, which has been correlated with team performance. Literally by removing blame, you improve your team psychological safety, which is a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. This is about creating a space where people feel like they're able to speak up when there's a problem. It's a place where they can take risks without fear. It's a place where people are supported by each other, and that enforcement of the fact that as an individual I'm not at risk by acting in whatever way is really one of the core beliefs. So we want to remove blame in order to improve our psychological safety at work. We want to improve our psychological safety because it's actually a catalyst for learning, and learning is something that we have to do as an organisation to keep up with the pace of change of technology. Next, I want to talk about trust, because if each of us are a component of our culture, then trust is like the spaghetti code integration layer between us. Trust is the firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. And so many of the negative beliefs we hold about other teams, about other people in our organisations, come down to a lack of trust or a damaged trust. So we need to find ways to rebuild that. And when we talk about trust, we can talk about it in two ways. We can either talk about trust as something we have or have not, or we can talk about it as an activity, as something we choose to do. And again, it's about sort of choosing your attitude towards a problem, choosing to trust another team where maybe you have not done in the past. And in a study by Ernest Fuhr at the University of Zurich, it was found that trust begets trust. If you trust people, you make them more trustworthy. And I think when we look at some of the processes we have in our organisation, how many of them have been put into place because we don't trust people to get their job right? Amy Harms, who she used to work at World Remit, I think she's now at Deliveroo as a site reliability engineer. She does a great talk about how she killed CAB, because I think CAB is one of those processes that is designed for an organisation which lacks trust. And what she talks about is how actually if you remove CAB, if you remove that process, then the responsibility gets displaced back to where it belongs. And by removing those processes that actually put the accountability elsewhere, rather than it being you, your team, who are responsible for the quality of your changes, actually no, like CAB will either approve or disapprove of it, and actually they're not necessarily the best people to make those decisions most of the time. By removing some of those processes that are a barrier to trust, it's the flip side. So if trust begets trust, then if you mistrust people, then they will become less trustworthy. If you remove some of those things, you actually bring back the accountability to the people who can make a difference, and they become more trustworthy as a result. And I know what you're thinking. So you're not going to go back into your office tomorrow and go like, I trust everyone, you're all awesome, I've learned so much. No, you're not, of course you're not, because actually it's really difficult, and you're going back into the office and the problems are still persisting, everyone's still working in the same way, you're getting triggered to think about things in that way that you always have done, everything's on fire, and you're back in a war room and you don't feel like you trust anybody anymore, and that's absolutely okay. Because guess what? It's that reptilian brain of yours again. So when we're stressed and when we're in firefighting mode, we've triggered off our sympathetic systems in our brain. We've triggered off our fight or flight instincts. We've got adrenaline and cortisol pumping through our veins, and actually, this has been shown to affect our ability to listen, our ability to understand, and our ability to make conscious decisions. Stress is a huge barrier for us making any kind of conscious change about the way we act and the way we work together. Not only that, but coping with stress and regulating the negative effects, resisting those temptations to behave in the way that you've always behaved, is a finite resource. Each time we have to use that self-control, we deplete that resource a little bit, and our subsequent attempts at self-control are more likely to fail. The reason I'm telling you this is because it's really hard to change. It's really hard to change just yourself. So if you can't do that, how can you expect to change a whole organization? And that's really what I'm here to talk about, because I think awareness is the greatest agent for change. Instead of looking at DevOps as though it's this switch that you can flick and immediately change your culture and have a DevOps collaboration overnight, we need to be aware of the way, as humans, we need to change. Which is why when I hear things like this, if you can't change your people, I get quite frustrated. Because sure, you could change your culture by firing everyone, like, if you want to. I don't think that's a very good strategy. If you want to transform your culture, then you need to give people the right environment to change. And when you threaten them with redundancy, you're going to increase their stress levels. You're going to create fear in your organization. And you're actually pointing the finger at certain individuals who are a bit slower to pick up on change, and you're blaming them. So all of these things that I've just told you are really bad, really toxic, and actually get in the way of adopting any kind of change. You're making it worse by threatening to fire people. So I would say it's an absolute last resort. If anyone tells you, if you can't change your people, tell them to shut up, because you're making it worse. If you support these people and you give them the right environment to change, and you give them enough time, because we are human and actually we cannot change overnight, then people will change. So I propose that we take a more human approach to DevOps. And I was thrilled when James was talking earlier, because actually I agreed with everything he said, which is always a relief when you've got two speakers talking about human subjects. But he talked about the way that the organisation that approached it from a culture first perspective was actually much more effective. And this is what I talk about when I talk about a human approach to DevOps. Let's start with the people. Let's not take our existing company culture, let's not take our existing processes and practices and just throw a load of Docker containers at it. That's not going to work. Let's just build a load of microservices and hope for the best. No, you actually might be making the problem worse if you take some of the technology-first approaches. So, to summarize the key messages that I'd like you to take away from this talk, you are a component of your culture. That means you can help change your culture. Culture is not something that just exists separate to you. You are part of it. You can help make it better. Second is that blame is a barrier to change. When we seek to blame people, we actually create an environment in which people can't learn. And we discussed how important it is to be able to learn and adapt in the current sort of state of technology. Trust is something you do. And when you trust, It makes the people you trust more trustworthy as a result. So look at yourself and look at the way you behave towards the teams around you and think about how you can maybe trust them more. And finally, we can use technology to remove stress. So stress is a huge barrier to doing anything positive in your organization. Why not look at the tools and technologies that can help remove the sources of pain that are causing you to be up all night firefighting? Address those first and do your big cloud or container transformation after that, when you've got a solid foundation and people have the mental capacity to attack those problems with more energy. I'm sorry, but this is not somebody else's job. It would be really easy for you to look at all of this human stuff and say like, oh yeah, I wish my manager knew all that. It would be really easy, but the thing is, it doesn't have to be somebody in a leadership position or a manager to do this stuff. Anybody who's got a voice in the organisation, and I hope that in your organisation that is everybody to a certain degree, can help make this happen. So my final thought is that humans are not like technology. Humans are hard. Humans are complicated, and it takes us a long time to change. But change we can. Have patience. All things are difficult before they become easy. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much, Hannah. Any of you humans got a question?
I like to do this.
Any of the machines got a question?
Does anyone just want a hug?
Anyone want a hug? Question is the turn, or like, half an hour to get questions.
Hannah,
Hello.
in this wonderful blameless world, how do you start to trust someone who you suspect has a hidden agenda?
Ooh. An evil person.
And how do you,
An actual
someone
evil.
that seems quite toxic, yeah.
Okay, so if you're suspecting that someone has ulterior motives, it's always useful to understand where those motives come from. So a lot of the time, people aren't horrible just because they're horrible. A lot of the time, they're motivated by different things, and I think a lot of the defensiveness that we sometimes face in our organisations can be tied to people's egos. If people feel threatened, if part of their sense of self, for example, if you're a sysadmin that is an absolute expert in their domain and it's getting taken away from them, when you threaten that, they can be quite hostile towards you. So I think there's a lot to be said for just listening and understanding and letting them say their bit before you assume they're evil. Questions at the back.
So a question somewhere here? At the back? Just over the back, isn't it?
Hi Anna, great talk by the way, thank you. I'm just wondering, a lot of companies who are now going through a DevOps journey have spent most of their life as a company trying to put processes in place to assign blame and avoid trust. How can you start to break those down if you're working for an older, more established company?
So I think James sort of alluded to this earlier as well. I think there's always a case of starting small. So start in the area that you can directly influence. You don't always have like a seat next to your CEO. You might not have any influence there. So start where you do have influence. Improve the things that you can improve. And if people see you doing good things, if people see that your team is happy and productive and they're working sustainably, then word gets around, and people will want to work with you and they'll want to learn from you.
Also got a question here from David.
My question is on the same topic of sort of trust, and do you have any advice into working with people, etc., on how to identify or how you've seen people identify people with, let's say, evil agendas or people that you shouldn't really trust?
How do you find people you shouldn't trust? I think that's the opposite of what I said.
How would you go about identifying people that shouldn't have that particular trust within an organization and people that might have, because you were saying before, like, trust, right? Now, you
Yeah.
can't give trust to everybody. Now, how do you identify people that shouldn't have that particular trust and, like, you went to revoke it, etc.? That type of thing.
Okay, well let's think of this as a like a specific example. So your junior developer who's had like 6 months experience on the job maybe shouldn't be trusted with all of the access keys to all of your production databases. That type of thing is just a sort of a common sense decision making thing. So that's not about not trusting the individual, that's just about recognizing someone's capabilities and making sure their role fits those. So if there's a mismatch, that might be where the lack of trust is coming from. I can't think of any other examples where you might not choose to trust someone. But yeah, teach people and then...
Okay, one more question.
Or actually, I'm going to offer hopefully a simpler answer to that question.
Oh, okay.
Which is you give them your trust and they will either repay it or you will learn something from them that you shouldn't trust them.
Maybe there is an opportunity to do.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
I got one more question just around here. Get my exercise to the moment.
So you were talking about blaming. How wrong is blaming? And I totally agree. But I would say instead of avoiding blaming, can it be used as a sort of fun in some other way? I've seen a lot of organizations like I would say I've been to a very interesting talk of a fashion guy talking about that they kind of build this game of blaming, but in a funny way, in which they keep them people recognize errors at the same time they just have fun.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like it's okay. Like if you've slipped up, like having like whatever it is, like having the donkey on your desk for a week because you were the biggest fuck up. That's okay because I actually don't think that individual who's having a laugh and you're all like, you did something wrong. I don't think they're feeling threatened. I don't think they're going to go home and worry about that. They're actually going to think like, okay, well I'm a shining example of what not to do, and everyone's learned something. Rather than like if people seek to hide their failures, then that's another sort of thing that's quite toxic in an organisation that can fester. So I think what you're saying is actually a way of removing blame by making it fun. Oh, I didn't hear that. I assume it's funny.
Sean is never funny. Anyway, thank you so much, Hannah.